Hello, everyone, and welcome to our keynote for Day 3, Becoming Future Ready Through Self-Directed Learning. Today I have with me Catherine Lombardozzi. Her mission in life is to help learning and development professionals be the best that they can be so they can have an impact through the work they do. She's a lifelong learner and development practitioner and founder of Learning for Learning Professionals and author of the book Learning Environments by Design. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Catherine.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. My session really is just to talk a little bit about how you develop the knowledge and the skill that you need in order to land the roles that you want or be ready for how the world is changing, how the field is changing. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we do self-directed learning for our own professional development. You know, on the one hand, this is what we do for a living, right? So we should be able to manage our own learning. But on the other hand, not all of us are experts in learning or experts in instructional design. And even when we are, I think we're sometimes the cobbler's children, right? We're the people who know everything about how this is supposed to work and fail to do it for ourselves. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what it should look like for us. So to some degree, we are in the golden age, really, for learning. We're situated in the middle of a learning and performance ecosystem that is incredibly rich, right? Our learning and performance ecosystem is everything that might support our learning and performance, whether it's inside the organizations with which we work or external to those organizations. And it includes things like the internet, which of course is gateway to the world. There's so much out there that we could potentially access. It includes your manager support, the kinds of things that your supervisors could do for you. Your training and formal education opportunities, whether it's something as short as a 2-hour workshop or as long as a degree program. There's lots of options for training and formal education in your ecosystem. There's room for on-the-job learning, whether it's formalized on-the-job training where someone's actually teaching you to do your job, or it's just the fact that you're doing your job and learning while you're doing it. There's social media, which is an incredible access point to a lot of interesting things that are going on in the world and can be really useful in supporting your professional development and your performance. And lastly, you've got your personal networks and communities, whether inside your organization or outside your organization. These are the people that really support your development. And theoretically, with this kind of learning and performance ecosystem, if you have something that you need to learn, all you have to do is reach out into this performance ecosystem and you can find everything that you want and be able to learn very effectively and very efficiently. Theoretically. It's not exactly the way it works, right? And anybody who's ever done a Google search understands that that's not exactly the way it works. In their book, A New Culture of Learning, Doug Thomas and John Seely Brown said that simply unleashing people on the internet doesn't solve the problem of being able to learn in this modern world. And what they said was we need to find a way to marry structure and freedom, right? So in our work with clients, we put together strategies that take advantage of curation and experiential learning and social learning and informal learning. We try to put together, a more comprehensive strategy for learning rather than just sticking to courses. And we have to do that same kind of thing for our own learning. We need to recognize that we have to craft our own structure for self-directed learning. It's not always just about doing a Google search. Let me start by defining what I mean by self-directed learning. And this definition comes from Malcolm Knowles all the way back in 1975. We've been studying this for a very long time. He said self-directed learning is a process in which individuals take the initiative with or without the help of others in diagnosing their needs, formulating learning goals, identifying resources for learning, choosing and implementing their strategies, and evaluating the outcomes. Right? That's a lot of stuff, right? And when we think about guiding people in self-directed learning, you can imagine how many people may actually have the skills to do all that. And even for ourselves, we have to think about whether or not we have the skills for all that. It's clear that self-directed learning is more than just volunteering to go to a course or volunteering to read a book or doing a simple internet search. Self-directed learning is a little bit more complicated than that. So what I've come to understand is that it's useful to have sort of a guidance for how you put together a good self-directed learning plan, and that's something that I've done a little bit of work on. But as I've done that work, I recognize that there's lots of different kinds of learning needs out there, and not all of them require an in-depth plan. There are those kinds of learning needs that are simple, search and learn, just go out and find a quick course, or find a book that will help you, or find the video that's going to give you exactly what you need. And then there are those learning things that really require in-depth planning. So let's take a look at that for a minute. I'm going to share a number of scenarios. And what I'd like for you to do is tell me in chat, is this something that you could solve with simple search and learn? Or is this something that requires more in-depth planning? So the first one is, let's say you've recorded a simple educational video, but you want to do a few quick edits, take out the opening part and the closing part, or whatever that might be. And how would you address that learning need? Is that something that you would do a search and learn, or something that you would do an in-depth planning for? I see a couple of answers in the chat, and it's search and learn. Absolutely. Let's take a look at another one. So in the pandemic, you scrambled to design online courses, but you find you like it, and you really want to get to know how to do that more effectively. So now you're thinking to yourself, I really want to know the pedagogy, the tools, the techniques of teaching online. Is that search and learn or in depth? Yeah, people have jumped right in. Regina says somewhere in between the two, and that's certainly possible, as you can see from the meter there. Let's take a look at another one. Your organization has made new presentation software available to you, and you need to get to know how to handle the basics of that new software. Some people call that in-depth. Some people call that search and learn. Certainly, it depends on how complicated the system is, right? Okay, good. Couple more. You're a lawyer, let's say, and you've noticed that you have more people coming in to set up small businesses. So you want to learn more about small business legal matters. Not been a specialty before now. We're seeing that as in-depth planning. And just one more, you're a people manager, and you have made a vow to yourself that you're going to be known as a great people developer. How do you gain the knowledge and skill needed to be an effective coach or mentor? In-depth planning. So you can see you've made some decisions about which is which, right? Which are in-depth planning and which are search and learn. So my question to you is, what makes the difference? Why would something be in-depth planning and not just a simple search and learn? You can put that in chat too, obviously. Need more than cursory knowledge, so the complexity matters. How much effort is needed matters. If you need to go beyond the basics, if it's a combination of more than one concept, something that needs a change in behavior that's over time, how important it is to you, your motivation for it. Obviously, would it require many sources? So recognizing that it's not just going to be one source that's going to feed what you need to know. Yes, exactly. So when you think about what you need to learn, first thing you need to do is decide whether this needs a big plan or whether it's quick, right? If it's quick, you just go and do it. If it needs an in-depth plan, that's where a process that I call charting your course comes into play. And I want to kind of walk you through what that could look like. So when you have in-depth learning needs, you can follow this process. So I did some research over the summer on self-directed learning, and came up with, I wrote a report for the Learning Guild, and I'll give you a link to it at the end of the session, where it kind of explained what the research on self-directed learning tells us. And from that research, I kind of pulled out and gleaned out, this is how we go about doing self-directed learning when it is a project that requires in-depth planning. And it's a three-phase process. It starts with orientating, which is just setting the goal and figuring out what you're going to be trying to learn. Then there's wayfinding, which is how you go about setting an itinerary for learning, making your plan, whatever that's going to be. And then there's journeying, which is executing the plan and executing it well so that the learning sticks and that you are indeed making progress on your learning journey. So in the setting your goal stage, there are three things that I think are really important. One is when you set a goal for self-directed learning like this and this in-depth thing, it's not the same as setting a goal as an instructional designer, right? Instructional designers on the line know it's participants will be able to, and you need a measurable verb. And, there's all kinds of rules that we have around what objectives look like when you're doing instructional design. This is not instructional design. This is doing some planning for your own development. And at this point, you don't have the knowledge to be able to be that precise in your goal setting. So really what you need is a clear idea of what your topic is, what you're looking at, so you have keywords that you can use to search for stuff, and you need your guiding questions. What exactly is it that I want to know? And that they may be 2 questions, it may be 10 questions, but you have a sense of what I'm going out there looking for. So that's setting your goal. You also need to understand why, because you need to prime your motivation, right? Doing self-directed learning at this level of depth, it requires your commitment. And so you've got to really get a handle on and articulate why this is important to you so that you'll persist in the process. And then the third thing I think is important is to set some development markers. What I advise to people is put a line in the sand on where you are between a novice and expert, just kind of say I'm about here. And then say, where do you want to be? You don't always want to be all the way up to expert. Sometimes you just want to move the dial up just a little bit. So get a sense of where your development markers are so you can know whether you're going to be successful. And when you're in the situation where a lot of you are in, where you're trying to figure out how you're going to manage your career in a situation where, jobs may be scarce or things are changing dramatically, as you're setting your goals, I think it's important to keep in mind something that Wayne Gretzky said, not that I know anything about hockey, but I know this is a pretty famous quote. He says, skate to where the puck is going to be. So when you set your goals in being future ready, you have to start thinking about what is the future going to hold? Where is the puck going to be? And keep that in mind as you set your goals. So I would say, look at what pundits are saying about future skills. You want to review industry capability models and find the skills that you want to build, which are not necessarily the ones that you're worst at, but they're the ones that you think will position you better for the future. You want to look at interesting job descriptions and analyze the skills that are necessary to land those jobs. And those are the skills that you want to develop. And you want to get feedback and input from the people that you trust. I think those are some of the things that we can do to really set goals that are robust and important to us. And I wonder if I could just see the kinds of goals you all have set for yourself for 2021. What are some of the learning projects that you have in the back of your mind? If you want to just throw that into chat, that'll give me a sense of kind of where we are, what we're looking to do. Video editing to create a portfolio. That's great. Coding apps for automation. Some of us are learning, the really new skills like artificial intelligence and how that's going to work, and how does personalization work. Storytelling is getting big. Online learning, I think, is getting big. Many of us have been doing classroom design forever, and now it's going online, and that really is a whole different animal. It's not just about, transferring things into webinar formats. There's other things that we can do once we go online. Absolutely. Analytics. The bite-sized learning, absolutely. Okay, so lots of interesting goals that you can plan. So keep that in the back of your mind as I go through the next step, which is what I call wayfinding. And wayfinding is a process of finding the materials that you're going to use to learn and making a plan on how you're going to work your way through them. So many individual development plans in the world, they put together sort of a random series of activities that, when you do it in a formal event, at least I know in my career, I'm going to go to a course, or I'm going to read this book, or, whatever it is you say, you know what your goal is, and you just have a few things that you think you can do that'll help you to achieve that goal. And they're not successful because they don't go far enough, right? So it's not enough to just get inputs. You also have to figure out how to translate what you're learning into guidance for future action, right? So when we do instructional design, we don't just teach people things, we also put together activities and make sure they get to talk about it and make sure they plan for how they're going to apply it. And we, really try to give them some authentic practice activities, right? We do all kinds of things besides just deliver content. And sometimes in our individual development planning, we only get so far as getting content and we don't actually plan the rest of it. So the itinerary in the charting your course process includes more than just that, right? So it does include exploration. That is the inputs, right? What videos you're going to watch, what books you're going to read, what courses are you going to take if that's appropriate for what you're trying to do. So what are the ways you're going to learn the content and get the basics of the skills down? That's the first set of things that you're going to need to find for your itinerary. Then you need interpersonal connections. We all know how important social learning is, and self-directed learning does not mean you're doing it alone. Right, you want to look for mentors and subject matter experts and connections within your organization and outside your organization that can be helpful in that learning process, either as coaches or as co-learners or as experts that give you content. So you're looking for those interpersonal connections. You want to look for and devise learning activities. How are you going to make sure after you read the book that you understood what it meant and you have some plans for how you're going to put that into action in your life, right? What do those learning activities look like that are maybe practice activities, they may be reflection activities, they may be discussion activities that you go out and talk to others about whatever it is that you're learning, but we have to figure out what those are going to be. So that's a part of the itinerary. You want to make sure you take it to that application step. Once you feel like you've got the skill in hand, how are you then going to put together application projects that can help you to test the waters and make sure you've actually got it, that are opportunities for you to get feedback on whether or not you're applying the skills or the knowledge accurately, right? So you have those application projects. And then lastly, you've got to think about habituation. We were talking a lot about that in learning and development these days. That is, how do you make sure this is going to be something that you have as part of your modus operandi from this point going forward? How are you going to make that a habit? So you want to think that through as part of your itinerary. So the plan is in wayfinding is to explore what are the possibilities here. You're not going to do everything that is a possibility. You're going to find 10 books that are useful, maybe. I don't know, it depends on the topic. But you might find 10 books that are useful. Are you going to read 10 books? Probably not. You're going to read one. So which one? So you have to go through not only and find activities and find these kinds of things, but you have to curate which are going to be the most impactful in your judgment, and kind of, start working your interpersonal connections to get some advice on this, but find out which kinds of things are going to be most impactful as you go forward, and then put together the plan that does that. So in that, I'm going to share with you a link to additional resources at the end of this presentation. But in that is a workbook for self-directed learning. So all this stuff that I just said, I put in workbook form, and I have some additional resources that can help you to kind of work your way through this. But in that workbook, I have a chart that looks like this. That is, what are some of the things that you might be looking for? So this is sort of a prompt to help you to figure out what are the potential learning resources? Where could you find formal training and education? What do we mean when we say interpersonal connections? How do I find these kinds of people? What kinds of folks am I looking for? So this chart will be really useful to you in actually identifying the possibilities and then making your decisions about what you're going to put into a self-directed learning plan. So what does that itinerary look like? It's deceptively simple, right? So let's imagine, for example, that one of your goals, is that you want to get better at strategic thinking and future readiness in the L&D field. And so some of your guiding questions are, what does it mean to define L&D strategy, and how do you go about doing that? And what are the current trends in L&D that should figure into my strategy if I'm going to do strategy, right? And so you've got all of these ways that you can learn, the exploration, the interpersonal connections, the learning activities, et cetera. And you've gone through all the possibilities, and this could be your plan. This is an example plan that I put together for this particular learning goal. It contains some books, it contains some industry reports, it contains some people that you might follow, et cetera. So there's some really interesting things here. It's deceptively simple. It's a few hours of work. I know enough about this that it doesn't only need to be a few hours of work, because I know some of the potential resources that you could put in. So it might be a little bit longer for you to make a plan. And that sounds like a lot of time when you don't have a lot of time, but it saves you a lot of time on the back end because you've made the right decisions about what are the things that you can reasonably do and what are the best resources that you can use to learn in that way. All right. So you really want to think that through. One thing I'll point out on this plan is that I have no application activities here because at this point, I don't know how I'm going to apply it. Let me get out there and learn a little bit, and then maybe I'll in segment 2. This is certainly only the beginning of learning this skill set, but in the next segment, then I'll start thinking about how I could potentially apply it. So the other thing that came out of the research on self-directed learning is the kinds of things that we need in order to be effective self-directed learners. And these are the skills that came out of that research. You need to be motivated. You need to be able to self-assess your skills. You need to have the resourcefulness to find the resources that you might be looking for. That takes it's internet skill and networking skill to be able to find stuff. You need to be able to plan, right? How much time am I going to have? How am I reasonably going to accomplish this? You need good learning skills, good reflection, for example, the ability to take good notes and translate what you're learning into action. And you need self-efficacy. That is that you have to believe that this is something you can do and that will benefit you if you do it. So those are the things that I call the wherewithal for self-directed learning. And again, in the resources that I'm going to share with you, you'll be able to get access to more information about that particular chart. So that's it. So easy, right? It's orientating, wayfinding, and then you go out and you run with it and see and make sure you have a process in place where you're checking yourself and you're getting feedback along the way. And at the end of what you've had in your original plan, then you reassess and you go back to the orientating phase and reset your goals, decide whether or not you're done with this topic or you have further to go, and make another plan to move forward. So I'm leaving just a few minutes, I think, for Q&A. I'm hoping folks have been watching the chat because I haven't seen too much of the chat as I've been chatting. But if you go out to the website at the bottom of this slide, that's got the link to where you can get the workbook for self-directed learning and links to a whole bunch of internet articles that I think are useful in this particular area. And obviously the QR code, if you've got a phone, you can just zone in on that QR code. That's I've never put a QR code on a slide deck. This is the first time. So I was kind of excited to do that. So you can just go right to that website and get some more information. All right, Jennifer, question. How does this apply to people who are neurologically different? I think what it applies to them in that it's going to impact what you choose to use as your learning resources and how you have to, people who have, all of us do this, but obviously people with neurological differences need to understand how they learn best and devise the strategies that they know work for them. Right. So if you don't like to read, you're going to be looking for videos, or you're going to be looking for audiobooks instead of paper copies of books. So all of those things come into play in terms of what you choose to use to access as learning inputs and then what you choose to do as activities. Anything else? Can't wait to dive in. Thank you.
Yeah, they really loved your chart.
The chart for self-directed learning?
Just kind of the overall spectrum process of how to move through that.
Yeah, I think that's really the challenge that we've had in the past with learning, with self-directed learning projects, is all we think about is how do I get the inputs? We don't think about, well, then how do I translate that into stuff that I do? And that's the critical part of learning. It's all well and good to read a book, but if you just put it back on your bookshelf and it doesn't really impact the way you do your work, you haven't learned anything. And so this process guides you to think about how do you really put more into play than just the inputs.
Yeah, and we did have a question in there about seeing the first chart. We're about to wrap up, so definitely download those assets. Another one that I provided to the group, Catherine, was the work that we did with ATD Forum.
Okay.
So that's another resource that will talk you through some of the self-directed learning in terms of the model, some additional resources on like Lotus charts and different things that you can use for that. But definitely hit the QR code that's on the page. We had some people validate that that works perfectly. And we did have a question about, when do you get feedback from people as you're going through your journey?
I think almost at every step of the phase. So you need feedback when you're making decisions about what to study, right? Because other people can tell you, oh, no, that's not a good book for you. You might want to read this, or that's not a good video. They can give you input. So that's one place where you get feedback. You get feedback as part of your learning process. You might just go and talk to people about what it is that you're learning, what it is you're finding. And you get feedback. I call them waypoints. So you go through a whole set of resources, and then you stop and self-assess again. And that's where you really need feedback. Am I doing this right? Am I getting it? So you have to get input from at that stage as well.
Perfect. Well,
I did have just this one closing quote from Abigail Adams. I'll let you read it. I won't say it out loud. This is the motto for my consulting practice. But really, you need to seek learning with ardor and attend to it with diligence. It's not as simple as everybody would have you believe, at least not for these kinds of deeper projects and a lot of the projects that we have for learning are those kinds of deeper projects.
Well, Catherine, thanks so much for joining us today and giving a little bit of insight into self-directed learning. Everyone, I hope this serves as your impetus to make sure that you are not the cobbler's children who are teaching everyone else how to learn, that you're taking that time to really structure how do you want to learn, to what depth you want to learn, and how you take that forward. So we've shared the links in here. We will have this available for you to look at following the conference. And with that, thanks, everybody, and you can go and to the lounge and talk with others and do some other events, and then live sessions will invite you as they start. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.